Campbell. He is the executive director of the Iowa Environmental Council, and we're really glad that he's taken time out of his day to share with us a tiny little bit of this big issue of the environment and climate care. So thank you again for taking time.
Yeah, thank you.
So the hardest question, we'll start with it first. So what are the most challenging obstacles to ending pollution and climate change? If you could pick one, what do you think they would be?
Yeah, I think, if you're like me, when you think about those challenges, that the sort of first reaction is just how huge and pervasive these things are. It's kind of overwhelming to imagine what one person could do to solve something that's global in scale and, is related to not, something that happens in one day, but in like centuries. And so, yeah, I think that one of the challenges is just, it's really easy to be paralyzed by that sense of the magnitude of the problem. It's easy to feel, kind of emotionally overwhelmed, as well as, inadequate. Like none of us has all the information. None of us has enough knowledge or power to solve this individually. And so I think that is the challenge, is it touches every part of our life. It connects us to people in the past and the future all over the planet. And so that's part of what makes it so important and meaningful, is it does challenge us so deeply to kind of rethink who we are and how we live together, and to figure out how we can just take action, start where we can and not be paralyzed by this kind of massive existential challenge.
Right. What do they call it? Analysis paralysis.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Spend so much time trying to figure out what the problem is that you never make any progress on actually moving forward, because it is such a huge thing. So tell us about the work that your organization is doing to address climate change and pollution.
Yeah, so the Iowa Environmental Council is a statewide nonprofit. We were founded in 1995, and we're the largest environmental coalition in the state. So we have over 100 member organizations, businesses, nonprofits, faith groups, school groups. And then we have thousands of individual members and supporters as well. And so we work especially at the policy level, thinking about how we can change laws and the sort of bigger systems to create that larger scale change. So we work with local governments on, climate goals, and we work with state policy at the legislature and with state agencies. We increasingly do a lot of work to help Iowans figure out how to access federal funding. There's a lot of support right now for responding to climate change with tax credits and federal grants and incentives that are everything from individual homeowners and consumers all the way up to businesses and government agencies. And so yeah, we kind of work to connect the dots between those different levels, and all of that work we do as a coalition. So bringing together different groups of people, helping make sure that all voices are represented and that people have ways that they can participate in decision making and policy making, and make sure that we're responding to this massive challenge at all those different levels, from the individual up to the federal.
Yeah, we talk about the difference between mission and justice. So, mission is, pull the babies out of the water, and justice is go upstream and figure out who's throwing the babies in the water. So, it's kind of the same thing. You're like, pull the pop can out. Some people got to pull the pop can out of the water, and you're up there saying who's throwing the pop can in and how can we find a better place to put the pop can. So yeah. We love justice. So it's exciting to hear that that's really the focus of your organization.
Yeah, and we're really lucky to have all these partner organizations that we work with that are doing amazing things on the ground, planting prairie and restoring wetlands and reducing waste and, supporting clean energy. And so there's all this really hands-on stuff that has to happen and is happening. And we're able to kind of bring those groups together and help think about, what are the policies that can support that and move those things more quickly. And so yeah, it's important to also have a connection to the babies and to be in touch with just how important that work is, and to make sure that the upstream responses are learning from that downstream realities too.
Yeah, yeah. I remember reading many years ago about a book called Living Downstream, especially related to these environmental challenges. Somebody's dumping their waste from their hog lot into a stream, but they're not the ones that are, going to really pay the price in the long term.
Mhm.
So when we're talking about creation responsibility, it is kind of a hard thing. Where do we begin? What's the first thing? What do you consider like the first thing that someone could do to begin to be responsible for creation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that wherever you are, there's things you can do. Um, I think people can do things in their home, in their day-to-day life, learning about kind of how they're connected to different systems, whether it's where your energy comes from or your food. And I think everybody has things that resonate with them on that level, of things that they can get interested in, curious about, and find ways to take small actions. I think it's really, really important though, to not just kind of live at that level of the individual. I mean, part of how we get into problems like this is thinking as individuals and not thinking collectively enough. And so, a congregation is a fabulous way to be connected with a group of people who can act more than the sum of just a bunch of individuals. And so, whether it's in your congregation, in your neighborhood groups, your workplace, I think, there's ways that you can really amplify the impacts by talking with other people, just again, beginning with the things you notice and that you're concerned about that don't seem quite right to you, or that you think could be better. And yeah, whether, every congregation there, there's things you can think of that you could do differently. Businesses, schools, wherever you come together with other people, I think there's those kind of opportunities. And yeah, I think there's the kind of entry points, of like, we notice things like where our waste goes, and it irritates us to feel like we're throwing things away that should be recycled. But I think you have to kind of quickly move to those bigger systems, because it can be too easy to kind of blame the individual, like you're saying. So yeah, a lot of what I think is important is talking with other people and acting as a group, and really focusing on the biggest issues. So like, you can't control, you can turn off your lights and save a little bit of electricity, but like our organization, the biggest pollution is coming from the coal plants, and you can't stop that on your own, but together we can stop that. And so you kind of coming together and noticing where the real focus should be is important.
You mentioned that, you're a coalition, you're lots of different organizations coming together to bring about change. So you're creating your own community of these like-minded individuals. So is there a project that you have seen a congregation do as part, like one of your coalition members? Have you ever seen it, like a project that really stood out to you as something that they did?
Yeah, I think there's lots of great examples. In Iowa, there's the UCC church in Urbandale has solar on their rooftop. There's the Unitarian Church in Coralville that's this like amazing model of a sustainable building. There's that kind of actions. There's lots of congregations that do really creative things to think about their energy in those ways, to think about how they manage their grounds, with native plants and habitat and things like that. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity for congregations to think about how they use their money, and their power, the power of their investments and endowments, and what kinds of stocks you own, and what kind of business practices you support. Those aren't the first things people think of. But the example that I thought of right away when you ask about a congregational partner project that we've worked on recently. We've been having some conversations with some African American churches in Waterloo, as well as some in the Des Moines area, really thinking about environmental justice and issues of pollution and the impacts of climate change, particularly on communities of color, low income communities. And so, we recently had a really amazing kind of community forum in Waterloo at Antioch Baptist Church with a couple different, a really interfaith group of churches who came together to talk about the legacy of pollution from a factory that manufactured munitions for World War II, and there's still toxic waste in the soil, and the kind of issue that hasn't had the attention it deserves, even from environmental groups historically. It's an issue that's affected primarily Black neighborhood in Waterloo and hasn't been taken as serious as it should. And so that's the kind of conversation that it happened in part because it was through congregations where people had that sense of trust and connection and leadership that could really speak up about those issues, and then help to draw in public health and city government and federal agencies to think about how to address those. And we're by no means done, trying to help in that situation, but excited to have partners like that from faith leaders and congregations, to help understand what's happening at that local level and what sort of policy changes could help.
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing, is for people to begin to see this intersection. The direct impact of some of these long-term issues like that. And just seeing the faces of the people who are experiencing long-term health issues because of this, and what are we doing now that's going to be the issue for the next generation to deal with, that we could put a stop to now. So one last question, and this is maybe one that we've kind of already answered, but if you could kind of sum it up, what would justice in the form of creation responsibility look like?
Yeah, like I said, I think that intersection that you were talking about is so important, to understand the social justice implications of climate change, environmental issues, to understand that these are moral issues. Yes, we need technological solutions, we need engineers and all sorts of smart people. What we need is that sort of moral impulse and collective commitment to helping respond to the way this is affecting people and communities, and especially the most vulnerable globally, but even in our own state. And so yeah, I think it takes that awareness and that kind of moral response and spiritual response, to really solve this kind of problem that again touches every aspect of our lives and is so overwhelming. So I think, yeah, that's part of what we need, in terms of justice as a response, is to understand those impacts through that moral lens, and then to respond with that level of concern, that we're motivated by that awareness of how this is harming people and non-humans as well, and really let that continue to kind of light the fire in us to do the hard work of figuring out how we can have more integrity as individuals, but also how we can come together to change policies and bigger systems.
Yeah, one small step at a time, right? Just got to keep heading in the right direction.
Yep.
Well, I'm so grateful for you again taking your time to do this, and I know this conversation will continue, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you.
Well, thanks to you and to the congregation for all you're doing.